So my name's Maddie Murdock. I am actually a gaming fiction writer. I guess experience with this topic comes from having run a college chapter of an esports club at BYU Hawaii. We had a TESPA chapter. I don't know if you guys are familiar with TESPA. It's basically like the esports association for collegiate leagues, and I was kind of helping as their event coordinator / staff advisor, and so I have some experience in kind of organizing tournaments in a kind of a club setting. As far as like my writing background goes, though, I do write a lot of gaming fiction, so I have written for game companies like Fantasy Flight.
She writes L5R, guys.
I do write L5R, if you know what that is, so you can buy my novella about magical scorpion samurai.
I actually know somebody who I might have to get that for.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Jess Lindsay. I haven't written anything yet. I've written a lot of stuff, I just haven't published it. My gaming background, I've been playing D&D since I was probably about 8. And then after I went on a mission, I got married, and then I got hired to work at a board game store. And I automatically had to start running Magic the Gathering tournaments. And because I actually played the board games that we sold, unlike the other employees who just played Magic, I was the one who got to run all of the board game tournaments that we did for 3 years. So I know how to do lots of different gaming tournaments, just not the electronic ones.
Defendi. I wrote Savage Seas for Exalted. I worked on Spycraft, Shadow Force Archer, Stargate SG-1 RPG, Rollmaster, Space Master. I'm pretty sure I did something for HARP. I don't remember. I did a game company called Final Redoubt Press where I produced the critically acclaimed setting, The Echoes of Heaven. I know it's critically acclaimed because it says so in my bio. And I've run 4 tournaments, 5 tournaments, something like that.
Nice. So we have electronic games, card and board games, and RPG tabletop.
Well, let's start with, we had a couple of questions about like what you need kind of before you plan a tournament, like before you host one, like what exactly should you plan for? So things like venues, things like advertising. So maybe we could kind of cover that. So what do we need to have in order to actually hold a game tournament?
You need to have the stuff to run the game. If you're doing a card game tournament and it's, for example, a Magic the Gathering draft, you have to have the draft packs already before. Having been a Magic official store, we had to have the product well in advance, and we had to hide it so that people would be like, well, we want to buy 5 packs. Why can't we buy those 5 packs right there? Because those are for the draft tonight that's in 3 hours. We're going to have tons of people paying us way more for that than you're going to pay us for those 4 packs. But so you have to have that what they're playing with in advance. If they're playing a board game, you have to have the board game. If they're playing a video game, you have to have the equipment for them to play that game.
Or you have to tell the players that they need to bring their own equipment.
Yes.
Because we have, in our club, we were actually hosting a League of Legends tournament, and we had lots of people from the community just bring their own PCs and just kind of set them on a bunch of desks. So occasionally you'll just say like, okay, please bring X, Y, or Z to the tournament. We will have facilities for you. We will have, extension cords and that type of thing, but you will need to provide your own.
It's very common
computer.
With RPG tournaments too. Like we'll say if you don't own the book, you can't have anything on your character that's not in the book. If you don't own the book and you want something, you can buy it at the store while you're there, if it's in stock, Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. But that's like a common RPG tournament rule is you have... If the book is allowed, because often you'll say these books are allowed, these books aren't. But if the book is allowed, you have to own the book and bring it yourself to be able to play something from it. That way the onus is not on the GM to have every book that's multiple copies of every book that might be needed during the tournament.
Yeah.
Okay. So it might be good then to just kind of have a running list of items that you will need to either provide for your players or that they will need to provide for themselves, and make sure that they know what that is.
Something else that you need, depending on the system, with some games you can have 200 people in a tournament, like Magic the Gathering, because I did a lot of that. we could have tournaments with, we actually did have a release tournament with over 100 players in one tournament. And you can do that with Magic because it's a card game. You can have as much of that as is needed. But if you're playing a board game, it's a limited number of players. And so you need to have like a sign-up sheet or something saying, so that they know this is how many people we can take in this tournament. This is what is available. We have spots and first come, first serve.
Say for an RPG tournament, because an RPG tournament you're mainly limited by two things: tables and how many game masters you can rally. Because I mean, you can only have as many groups competing as you have game masters to run it, right? And it's almost impossible. I've done it, but it's almost impossible to have somebody step in at the last moment and game master something that they haven't pre-read. I did have to do that once where we were doing one and the group came, and luckily the group came in late, and so I was handing off with the GM. I'm like, this round is easy, you can do it. This round you can't do. So I will do this table for this round. I will take your table for that round. Then you can come back and take the table back for this, and I'll go. And we were just juggling tables because there was one round that he just could not do because it just takes an encyclopedic knowledge of that round to run it because it was a murder mystery, and you just can't run a murder mystery without knowing everything that the players will never find out, right? You know,
yeah, like who the murderer is.
But to answer that, yeah. Well, there's a line in Death of an Archmage, which is the first murder mystery adventure ever published, that said the DM has to have at his fingertips every bit of knowledge that the players will never know, because you just have to. I mean, you won't tell the player the information, but you have to know the implications of everything, right? Was somebody in this room 10 minutes ago, and who was it? Because you have to be laying clues down about that, right? But to answer the question, like with an RPG tournament, the first thing you need to do is you need to have like probably a GM pack and a player pack that outlines all of the rules, everything they're expected to bring, everything the store will provide, like all of the store specific rules, like, you know, don't be a dick, you know, all those kind of rules.
If your store has a no saying certain swear words rule.
Right, yeah, don't be a horrible misogynist jerk, you know, that kind of stuff. All of those rules. I wasn't looking at you specifically when I
felt the pressure.
You just happen to be where my neck falls naturally when I'm talking. Yeah, so we have a packet. I have one that I just rewrite every time I have to do these, and then we'll explain any philosophy things. Like a lot of RPG tournaments have a score on role playing, which is super problematic. And so, like when I was working with Dragon's Keep, we always scored role-playing differently so that it was more accepting of different types of role-players. And so we would kind of outline that a little bit, I think, in the players' packet so that they knew what they were getting into. So the people with social anxiety knew they weren't going to be screwed out of winning because somebody who graduated Juilliard was, you know, at another table, you know. So, just things like that. But... you need to work it all out in advance.
You need to know what resources you're going to need, whether you're providing them or the players are.
And I think part of that is also budget. How much do you have to actually spend on venue? Are you planning on having food? Are you planning on having prizes? Are you planning on hosting it at a particular venue that can accommodate a certain number of people? And so I think kind of just outlining what I guess like your budgetary limitations are is also helpful. And then also just kind of what you're bringing up, like what guidelines or rules do you have as far as behaviors are you expecting from your player base? So are there grounds for potentially like getting kicked out of the venue or the tournament for certain types of behavior? Or what are the win conditions? Like what will cost you a game versus what will allow you to actually
I used to run pirate games for Iron Crown at Origins for Run Out the Guns, and the first things they would drill into us is, I know this is a pirate game, but the first person engages in slavery, or or the first person who says, I grabbed the woman and have my way with her, they're out. Right? We will have none of that on our tables. Right? Those are hard expulsions. I don't care how much money they paid to be there. And so, you want to set those rules early so that you know that everybody's going to be comfortable at your game. You asked about advertising. I've never been at a tournament that actually did hard, like heavy advertising, but the big one for us was always if the people at the store knew it was happening and they told people about it. The people at the store knew it was happening and they told people about it, we'd have 50, 60 people show up. If the people at the store didn't tell people about it, I'd have one table and I'd be like, guess who wins the prize?
Actually, having run so many board game tournaments at a game store, we had all these demo copies, because that was the thing that my game store did, was we had demo copies of some of these games. So we already had all the games, we had the space, we would be given prize support for free from these distribution companies. And even with our consistent player bases, we had so much trouble because we didn't advertise outside of our regulars because nobody else was there. We'd put up posters and say, here's a sign up. And sometimes you're just not going to get the people. We actually had trouble with that for a big game day event because a store down the street had comic book day at the same time. That wasn't going to happen.
But kind of one point that both of you are bringing up is that a game store is a great place to potentially hold a game tournament. So you could approach,
usually free.
Yeah, so if you approach a game store, potentially management at the game store, and ask, hey, we want to hold this type of tournament, would it be okay if we use your facilities? I think that's an excellent option.
Yeah, usually it's a win-win for them because they usually make a fair amount of, even if they're not getting a take on the door,
yeah,
they're usually making money off the people who are because especially at like an RPG tournament, if you tell them you can't play that class unless you buy that book, it's for sale over there.
Or if you forgot your dice, that's okay. They have a pack of dice for $7.
Right? Yeah.
And they also usually have like snacks and things.
Yes.
Card sleeves.
Yep.
Card sleeves, boxes. Okay, I didn't know this game existed, and my wife likes playing board games, but I'm into Magic and she isn't. Let's get a board game for my wife.
Right, exactly. Yeah, got you went to a tournament. Have you sufficiently dropped the spouse aggro that you generated tonight for whoever your spouse is staying at home watching the kids? Because if you bring home a present for them, might alleviate the spouse aggro. How does your husband feel about you being here, Missy? Does he like magic? Is he like magic, and that's why you're at the D&D tournament? Is that what's going on? Because there's all these magic cards.
See, we actually had the venue thing. We actually, because it was a game store that I was working at, we had the Yu-Gi-Oh people are a whole nother story, but they're the ones that we had rules for, and they're the ones that would get kicked out for cheating and trying to get away with it. It's like, what do you mean I can't play this card because it's the pre-release and tomorrow's the release day? I'm sorry, you can't play that in a tournament until it's officially released. But we had a group of Pokemon card game players who they came in, and it was a guy at a Taekwondo gym or something, and he's like, hey, a bunch of my students love playing Pokemon. Is it okay if we come and play Pokemon, or if me and my kids come and play D&D at your store? And they would we set up a scheduling thing so that different groups could come in and say, hey, I want to come and play this game on this night of the week. You have a back room. Can we use that? And the stores love it when you do that, when you come up and are like, hey, we're looking for a place to play this game or a place to do this tournament, or when is good for you? And they're willing to work with you. It's awesome.
Something else as far as venues go that might be helpful is contacting people that are in charge of conventions or symposiums like this one and saying, hey, this is what I would like to do at your symposium. Is that okay? Because they will already kind of pay for the venue and all of that, but they can just kind of help facilitate you to integrate your activity into their schedule, which is pretty nice. And so contacting larger organizations that are already event coordinating, that are already trying to attract, vendors and attract players and attract attendees, like that might be something that allows you to just help them successfully run an event. And so
that's extra advertising. They will often advertise your event for you, like say, oh, hey, this group is coming in to run this game, and they will let people know as well, and that's a bonus advertising. If you're working with this tournament group, with this with a venue or with a committee, they're like, hey, we've got a guy doing this. If you want to go and play this game, or if you want to go and do this tournament. They did a Magic tournament Thursday night, actually, and they were like, hey, guys, you want to go play Magic? There's a tournament going on tonight.
Question real fast.
Just a comment. Another good location that I found is craft breweries.
Craft breweries, huh?
We did some tournaments there. Cards Against Humanity, Vegas.
Cool. And I know some bars and taverns will also run things like Hearthstone events, right? For those of you that like Blizzard games, because what do you do when you play Hearthstone? You drink, right? Because it's like you're in a tavern.
Actually, a friend of mine worked at Fizz, a soda store, for a little while, and his boss was like, hey, you're bringing in customers, you can totally play D&D once a week at the store in front of the counter. And I've also seen people doing this with local libraries, where they will go and they will get a back room or a table at a library. And some libraries are totally cool with this, as long as you don't get too rowdy or too offensive. They're cool with letting you come to play D&D. Actually, my husband and I used to play D&D at Salt Lake Community College. We would just plop at a table and play. So you can also play if you're attending a school.
I used to do that at UVU, yeah.
Yeah.
It also really helps if whoever runs the venue, you catch them hiding a body. Not speaking from experience, but especially if you have a shovel handy.
Let me help you with that.
Right, that's why I keep one in my trunk.
So we kind of touched on advertising a little bit, right? So if you have like events or venues that will already advertise for you, that's a possibility. But I think as far as other advertisement opportunities go, think about just where your target demographic of players hang out / go. So that's in the real world. So places like college bulletin boards. It could be like supermarket bulletin boards, but also online. So like what social media platforms do they use? What websites maybe would they be
They have a Facebook group. Go post on join their Facebook group and post on that Facebook group.
Absolutely, because that's going to give you a lot of options for advertising. Because a lot of times people kind of, I don't know, you'll have regulars that will want to attend your tournament because they already know about it or whatever, but sometimes on the off chance you'll just catch someone who doesn't have something to do that night, and so you definitely can kind of bank on like the random encounter, like, oh, I just passed this and saw it had, I don't know, Yu-Gi-Oh on the poster or something like that.
Well, and ask them, because they're going to know what gets the most play. They're going to know if their Facebook page, their web page, or like their news group or whatever gets their mailing list gets the most like attention if they put on an announcement. Find out what they get the most attention from and ask them to put it there, to help you put it there if it's something you can't access.
That was actually something that when I was working at the game store, we got new management after I'd been there for a bit, and they said, guys, we don't know all of these tournaments and games that are being run. Like, it was a husband and wife pair, and he's like, well, I play Magic and she plays board games, but neither of us know anything about Dice Masters and HeroClix. And none of us know anything about Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. And so they talked to the employees, and they're like, okay, you play Magic and you're really good at it. You're in charge of the Magic events. You actually talk to the guys that play HeroClix and Dice Masters. You're going to go and find out how to be a judge on those games, and you're going to be in charge of those. You actually are friends with the Pokemon players. You're going to learn the rules, and you're going to talk to them. Having those people who are like, oh, I actually am part of this community, go find those people. If you go to whatever local game store, whatever local community that you can get to, say, hey, you guys actually are really involved in this. I want to run this. How do I get the word out? And they can always tell you, well, this is where I go. This is this is who you can talk to, or I can spread the word because I'm already here.
Okay, we also had a question about like
we had a question about prize support.
That's right, prizes. So I think that's also kind of tied in with sponsors. In the past, generally...
I'll let you two go on this. I've never been involved in that part.
Generally, what I've seen with with being involved with an organization like TESPA was that they were very willing to just like send you a bunch of swag that they had. So for example, because we signed up as an official chapter with an organization like TESPA, they were already plugged in with lots of sponsors like Blizzard and Riot and Valve, and so they already had a lot of their just stuff that they could provide for your players because you were a part of an organization. For the less formal events, we were actually able to get sponsors by just asking local businesses, hey, we have a tournament that's coming up. What potentially could you give to our players that just has like very little like monetary value? It's like maybe like a $5 off coupon or something to your store for, or maybe like a free cookie or something like that. Like they're willing to like give you just a small thing because number one, it does advertise for their business, but also kind of gives you small options for prizes. And I think as far as prizes go, people are willing to play in tournaments for not very much. Like the prestige of winning is great, but also like they will play for like an ice cream cone basically. So I guess it does depend on like the level of like intensity or formality of your tournament. If it's like a huge tournament, they'll probably not necessarily be appeased by just a cookie because they spent a lot of time preparing and playing and being involved in your tournament. But if it's something that's just a tournament that goes on for just a couple of hours, you know, like I've attended Magic the Gathering tournaments where they just give you a pack, you know, if you make it in the top few players.
It also depends on the type of tournament. Like when I was doing the RPG tournaments, if it's a big, long RPG adventure with a satisfying end, I mean, they got to go through a cool story also, right? So even though that's a 12-hour commitment maybe, like in 3 rounds, that's a 12-hour commitment in 3 rounds that they do recreationally. That's what they seek out recreationally. You know what I mean? It's not, it's not high stress time like a Magic tournament might be where they're afraid they're going to lose the whole time. You're not afraid you're going to lose in the middle of a D&D tournament.
You're too busy trying to stay alive and kill the monsters.
You're like, booyah, I did something creative with my snake. So.
Having done board game and Magic the Gathering and all of these different tournaments, something that I noticed, especially with board games, it was, hey, you guys get these cool pieces for these games, and if they didn't already own the game, they didn't care if they got cool pieces for the game. But with the Magic tournaments, it was, I got a pack just for participating, cool. Or I didn't pay anything for this tournament, but I got to play and I had a good time. And oh, hey, I actually got in the top 4. I get a pack that I didn't have to pay for. But the people that were doing the really big, intense tournaments, they paid more for it, so they got more prize support. And so that price, if your tournament costs anything and how much it costs, also makes a big difference.
That's obviously a good thing to kind of bank on for a budget for your tournament. If you have some type of pay-to-play entry fee for the tournament, then that's
the prize support can go up based on how many entrants you get.
Yeah.
Oh, I do have something appropriate to say about prizes. Something costs absolutely no money if the tournament is appropriate. Like RPGs are very appropriate for this. If the tournament is appropriate for this, funny prizes, like funny awards, like I would, between all of our rounds on our first tournament, all the GMs would talk, right? And they'd tell stories about all the ridiculous things their groups were doing, right? So when I was handing out prizes, I was one tabulating all the points at the end. So when I was handing out prizes, like lots of different groups got awards that were like, and the award for the most inappropriate use of a snake. And also, you know, the role-playing award goes to, you know, and that was nothing. It was just like a little prestige award to say, hey, all the GMs noticed that you were making them laugh more than any other group, right? And we want to acknowledge that you were the funniest group, you know? And doing things like that, you know, makes them feel great even if they didn't, you know, win, right?
We actually had a guy do that. We had a free Dice Masters tournament running for a while, and only like 4 or 5 people would play ever. But the guy that was running it would print out these on really fancy paper because he worked at a printing place, he would get these really stupid certificates like number 1 sloth groomer, number 13 in this, and the guy that that had the cleanest toilet, and it was stupid stuff. And you didn't get any prizes for it. It was just really funny, and we loved it.
Yeah, it really breaks up an award ceremony.
It really does.
I would suggest, though, that your players know what they're competing for ahead of time, so it's not like they get to the end and then you get them this gift and they're like, oh, that's what I get. Like, make sure that they know ahead of time what the
it's a really good idea.
Yeah.
If it's posted somewhere like, a $50 gift certificate is the prize or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've
Or
also
gift
seen
certificate to the
another
winner.
kind of form of prize, which is like a prestige prize, where basically like you'll get your picture taken and a type of like shout out on their social media. So I've actually seen like game tournaments where like you take a picture of the winner and they get some type of like a badge for blue or something like that on the Facebook page of the game company that was sponsoring the event. So something like that is also just like, hey, it doesn't cost anything, it's just prestige. Like, hey, I got
You were the famous
advertised as
person of the week because
Exactly.
you won all of the Magic games.
exactly.
I hospitalized a GM during a game tournament once as a player because she had asthma and I was that funny.
That is prize enough.
She had to leave because of an asthma attack. I found out later that she had to go to the doctor because of the asthma attack. I found out later that they hospitalized her and I started feeling bad at that point. Before that, I was just smiling at everybody else since we had the terrible DM who was the actual store owner who had never had the adventure, and he was trying to fuddle his way through, and I'm just like, I did all this to you. Because I'm that funny.
Okay, we had a question about balancing relationships of players. So obviously, if you have a group of people in a room, there's going to be disagreements, there's going to be fights, people rage quit games sometimes. How have you guys mitigated kind of just tempers and things like that?
We have... I mean, like in a D&D group, that's just a GM skill, right? So most of that isn't a tournament thing. It's just having GMs that can do that, because GMs have to do that every game session ever, right? Especially if they're dealing with pickup groups. So on that level, it's not usually a problem. It only becomes a problem if it gets weird off that level. We had one where a group complained about the GM. And I just took that group the next round because everybody loves me because I'm super funny.
It's asthmatically funny, right?
Hospitalize a GM, right? No, so they gave me the group the next round, and we just made sure that group never got that GM again. And I think somebody at the store talked to him about backing off a little. And it wasn't that he was a jerk. He was just, he was kind of a killer GM, and so he was just way more...
He was a TPK.
brutal. Yeah, he was just
He was
way
a
more...
TPK guy.
Like, he was letting people pull like 5 rooms at once, and under circumstances where I just never would have done that as in a tournament, right? Maybe if it was funny in an adventure, I would do it. But
If you go and open the door and your party says, don't open the door, we're in the middle of a fight, and they do it anyways, let them die.
Right. But they were like peeking into a room and then leaving, and things that would only activate if you went into the room were hunting the party down. So 5 rooms attacked them at once. And anyway, the module was definitely not written for that to happen. And I know because I wrote it. And so, I mean, you could interpret it that way, but he was interpreting the harshest way possible. So, we, just did the best. I think they gave them a little prize on the side too, to appease them.
Pity prizes are fully acceptable, especially if you call them this is the pity prize. You got last place here.
Well, no, I mean, I think they said here you all get a 10% off coupon, for your next purchase, just as an apology. This has nothing to do with your placement in the tournament. We just want to apologize if there are any hard feelings, right?
See, I have 2 stories about balance. The first is if somebody is breaking the rules, if somebody is screwing stuff up, if somebody is cheating. And thankfully, I wasn't the one that had to do this, but I had a coworker who had to boot people out of the store for cheating, for doing stuff that they had been told beforehand, this is not allowed. And so they were playing way more powerful than they should have because they had stolen cards. This group specifically had stolen cards from the store, which we found out later. But they were abusing the fact that their opponent was still learning and say, oh, you don't know what this card does, I'm just not going to tell you, and let it do its thing. Where if it was somebody who had practiced with that card, this isn't even in Magic either, if somebody who had seen that card before would be like, oh, it does this thing, I need to stop it before it ticks that ability. And so we've had people who were breaking store rules, they were breaking game rules, and you have to get somebody from the store to come and say, hey, you can't be doing this, you're breaking the rules, you've been warned, you've got to go. And the power balance just kind of went back to normal when the cheaters were gone. The other was a game that does not balance well. In a tournament format, we were told they want us to, the corporate people who sent us all this stuff want us to run a game that is not balanced for a tournament setting. So we had to figure out how to do that. The game in particular was Mysterium, where you have a ghost and a whole bunch of spirit detective people who have to interpret what the ghost is saying. And so we had to figure out a point system separately for the ghost and separately for the mediums.
Here's a little exclamation point next to Mysterium.
Yes.
That's how badly it balances.
It is not a tournament game.
No.
And so because we were handed all this stuff for a Mysterium tournament, for game day, we're like, how do you tournament this? And so sadly, we only had one round of it, but we were able to get people points for how well they worked together, for how well they guessed things. It was, oh, you get to this point, you get so many points. And we had an entirely separate system for the one being the ghost, because they had to work with entirely different rules and not as an actual part of the party that was working towards all of these other goals. It was actually really interesting trying to figure that out. So make sure that your game is you're doing something that you can balance. Like with Mysterium, that doesn't work very well. But if you're playing D&D, as long as the GM is like store provided or tournament provided, all of the players are on an equal footing there.
And that brings me to that role-playing thing that I was kind of hinting at before. One of the Dragon's Keep, when they asked me to do the first tournament, actually called this out as a problem they had with every tournament. Excuse me. Most D&D tournaments will score you on role-playing, and that's problematic because you have people who will always role-play in the first person, and you have people who will only role-play by saying, my character says this, my character does this, because they're not comfortable going farther. And you have people who have social anxiety to the point where coming to a tournament is like the crowning achievement of their life, and just getting there was a massive accomplishment, right? And you need to score all of them equally, and that's almost never done in tournament scoring. So what we did, my solution to it was I gave everybody, they all had to pick an archetype, and the archetype had like something they were super fascinated with and something they were afraid of. And everybody just got the role-playing points by default, and you were negatively scored if you did not attempt to do the thing that was called out in the module. If they were afraid of undead, or if they hated undead, or whatever the thing was, it would say, if the person with this archetype did not, did not represent the fact that they really, really wanted to kill these undead, minus 200 points, right? If the person who really loves children does not engage with the little girl who's running around in this scene and being all cute, minus 200 points, right? And that way, whatever their bare minimum that person can do would qualify, and you weren't giving them a sliding scale on whether or not they're great at improv theater. But yeah, I mean, just because it's so subjective, right? And some of these things are, and you just have to adjust for that.
So I think part of being, like a tournament runner is just being able to be adaptable. Like, obviously, there's only so much you can plan for as far as, like, problems or potential obstacles, but I think you also have to realize that, like, just think on your toes is going to be something that you need.
Yeah, like I was talking with the one with the murder mystery, we're swapping tables because I'm the only one who knew how to run Act 2, right? Yeah.
Right. So think about what problems absolutely, like, just be creative in your problem solving, I would suggest, definitely.
Also, if you're running a game tournament, whether it's a board game, a card game, RPG, video games, be familiar with the rules of that game. You, as the tournament runner, are one of the few people there. If it's a Magic tournament, you have judges they can go to. But if you're running a board game tournament, or you're the one who's running this gaming tournament, you're going to be the one that they go to first to say, hey, we have a rules question. We need you to be the tiebreaker because both of these are in the rules. Which one stacks on top? Which one comes out as being the winning rule? So you have to be very familiar with the rules of that game.
And probably have the FAQ, bookmarked and...
No, have it, if there's an FAQ, have it saved on your phone.
Yeah, for sure.
HeroClix actually has an app for their rules. So if you have a question about a rule, you can just pull up the app on your phone and be like, okay, it's this type of ability. Oh yeah, this trumps that other ability.
In D&D, you'll be Googling Sage Advice plus whatever the question is.
Yeah. D&D has wiki pages,
Right.
multiple, depending on which system you're running.
Excellent. Okay, I think we've run out of questions. Does anyone else have any other questions or things that they want to hear from us about?
So, like, how would you, like, for example, like, if you wanted to promote something new, maybe, like, say you, like, were developing some intellectual property or game or something, like, that would be the best way to, like, run a tournament to promote that?
I would try to find something that's similar to it and advertise to people that like that thing.
Say, hey, do you like Dixit? Do you like mystery? Come play Mysterium. It's like Dixit, but a ghost story.
Is it entirely new, or is it like a new thing attached to something that isn't new?
Well, I guess it'd be entirely new.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd find
Then what
games
they
that are
say.
similar. Yeah. We actually had people do that with when Force of Will hit America. It took a year before my boss was like, okay, we'll run Force of Will. And when people would come up to us as store employees, be like, what is this game called Force of Will? Because there's a Magic card with that name. We thought it was that. No, this is a new game. It plays like Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! At the same time. So you get the complexity and interestingness of Magic, but the simplicity of Yu-Gi-Oh! And you combine those two. And it was really interesting because they played both of these other games, or at least one of them, and they would be like, oh, okay, I get it. It's the point system for Yu-Gi-Oh! It's the complexity of Magic. It's easy to understand once it's familiar to them. And more often than not, if they were familiar with one of the other two, they would be more likely to pick up that game that's like those other games.
And the animal cruelty of Pokemon.
Yes.
Another thing that you can do is you could potentially like advertise at like a symposium like this and say like, hey, I have this game, and maybe you could have like a card or something that's like a short pitch and just say like, I'm going to be running this tournament at this time. Here, this, like, maybe you'd be interested in this, and just like pass out information that way.
Earlier today, for 3 hours, I played a prototype role-playing game, and that was a blast, and they got some really good feedback, and they basically just announced, we're going to do this in the game room, and so we did that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I've been to gaming tournaments as well where people will demo prototypes, and so they'll actually just have their friends come and just play the game in front of people and kind of like ask attendees like, hey, come try this for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Or
I did a couple
like
of board
that,
game
so.
conventions, and that was the entire thing, is they'd have the game set up, and you'd watch other people play and be like, oh, that looks interesting. What is it?
Tournaments aside, demoing is an art form. If you've ever seen the guys demo Warhammer
Oh my goodness.
Gen Con, I mean, they're standing up on chairs. They're having people screaming, "Blood for the Blood God!" I mean, and I don't know how these guys can go through an entire day without losing their voices because they're screaming like drill instructors the entire time.
There's an art to screaming like that.
There is, and I lose my voice on the first day, and I have to bribe waitresses to make me their home remedies for losing their voice, and it's a nightmare for me. And they just do it all day long, every day.
Okay, one last question and then we're done. You had your hand raised now? Okay. Any other questions? No, you came at just at the right time, Mike. Okay, thank you very much
Thanks
for
for coming,
attending.
guys.